Hey guys, finally managed to get the scalp of Jack-O-Lantern, the Halloween themed bot, which I think might expire today, so if you want to beat this bot you need to move in quickly, seeing as it's now Halloween. It's bloody miserable outside, it's dark, it's pissing with rain, it's going to be cold, and I've got to go out and referee a girls match in a couple of hours, so before that, at least let's have some fun with Jack. Okay, so Jack-O-Lantern bot rated around 1600, and of course I'm around 1500 rapid myself, and I've got the black pieces. So I'm playing the French and normal French. Okay, and now this is possibly White's most aggressive approach, and there's a couple of ideas here. One is to come out and pin the knight against the king with your bishop. But I choose not to do that. I prefer just c5, and we have takes. So we've got a version of the French exchange variation. Queen now comes in with check. That doesn't concern me because I've got two bishops and a knight and a queen that can all block. So I use my light squared bishop here. Obviously with the French exchange, the light squared bishop is not so much of a problem piece as it is in most lines in the French. And now we have pawn takes, which just allows me to develop my bishop for free. So I'm quite happy there. I mean, generally, you never want to play d takes c5 in the French if you're white, because it just, I mean, you're giving up a central pawn in return for a wing pawn, and you're also giving your opponent free development. So I'm quite happy at this point. Now we have a3, kind of slow, and I play knight e7, adding another defender to this pawn, also adding another block in front of my king. Bishop comes out, I develop my knight now to c6. So I'm fairly happy. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces developed against White's 3. Okay, so there you go. And now b4, again another, see this is where White is losing tempi because he's pushing these pawns. I just drop my bishop back to d6. If he wants to trade off bishops, happy days. He does indeed. Happy days. Okay, and now where is White's development, right? He's got a queen out, he's got a knight out, his pawns are starting to look a bit fragmented. So out comes the other knight, and I castle to safety. Now b5. So he's playing quite aggressively here. I put my knight round to a5. I mean, this isn't playable because it's attacked twice and defended only by the queen. Obviously there it's attacked by the knight, there it's attacked by the pawn. But I do have potentially a nice outpost here on c4. Queen advances now, and I put my knight on c4. So I'm inviting him to use his final bishop and swap it off for my knight. He does that indeed, and I recapture with a pawn. Okay, now is he going to castle? No, he attacks my queen, but at the same time hangs a pawn here. So queen takes a3. And now he castles. Okay, so I'm up a pawn. So now it's a question of convert the advantage, right? This pawn's not too bad, it's defended by a bishop here. So now rook f to e1. And obviously I'm threatening if I move these pieces, the last one that moves is going to come with a discovered attack on the queen. We have knight d5. And I decide to trade off queens. But White now here plays an in-between move, capturing my knight with check, forcing rook takes, and then he takes back. But look at this situation, right? He's got 3 pawn islands now. Okay, he's got a 2, a solo in the middle, and this is another 2. Okay, I have 2 pawn islands. I've got a 3 here, and potentially a 3 here, although this pawn is never going to be able to get up to defend this one, so marginal difference. However, the other imbalance is, going into the ending, I have a bishop and he only has a knight. Okay, knights are slow and plodding in the endgame. And when you've got pawns on all sides of the board, right, you've got all pawns on one side or all pawns in the middle, the knight is at less of a disadvantage, right? But when you've got pawns on either side of the board, either your own or your opponent's, bishops then come into their own because bishops can cross the board very quickly. So I now move my bishop out of the way, and this comes with a discovered attack on the pawn. I'm also pinning the knight here against the rook. So is he going to defend the pawn? No. He decides instead to fork my bishop and my pawn, but giving up this pawn at the same time. So I just retreat my bishop and defend the pawn. I don't want to give up my bishop. I don't really want to trade my bishop for white's knight. Okay, doubles up his rooks. Now, this is where you've got to be very careful, okay? If rook here, yeah, I can't capture because rook takes, and then I'm in check. The only legal move is rook here, and then rook takes, and it's checkmate, okay? The other thing that you always have to remember is, on these back rank ideas, that you don't always have to capture. But in this instance I would, because this is a fork. I'm in check and my rook is under attack. Okay, so I've got to do something about this threat. This is a forcing threat. So G7 gives my king an escape square. Okay, remember I'm still up a pawn. Okay, so now he improves his king, starts to centralize, mobilize his king for the ending. And there we go. Somebody is sending me like a whole series of challenges. I'm going to have to block that dude. I don't know who he is. Okay, so there we go. There he goes again. So King G7. Just taking my king off the back rank, and also maybe giving myself a little bit of a head start towards the centre of the board. Okay. His knight now comes in attacking my bishop, and I decide to ignore the threat. So if he wants to take out my bishop now, okay, I recapture the knight, but I'm also now defending this pawn. He pushes, I take, free pawn. King moves, I advance. And now, this pawn is now defended by another pawn, right? Okay. So, scrappy bit of play there, I think, from Jack. Okay, so now I get to advance another pawn, because this guy is defended by my rook. Okay. And he retreats his rook, now b5. So now I've got a really nice 3 against 1 advantage here on the queen side. And now he finally decides it's worth somehow swapping off his knight for my bishop. But it's too late now. I've got a 2-pawn advantage. This pawn is hanging, and I've got a big crushing lead on there. So now rook comes across to attack the b4 pawn. So what do I do here? Okay. Well, I actually have a nice in-between idea. So rook takes e3, and the king is in check, right? So the king's going to have to move, and now I can play rook to c3. Okay, so if he wants to take this pawn, that's fine. I get his c2 pawn. So he moves to defend, and now I can push b3. So if pawn takes, I've got pawn takes or rook takes, right? And now he does take, I take back the pawn, rook comes back, rook b8 defends the pawn, king up, and now it's just a case of just creeping up the board with those pawns, right? It's a little pawn caterpillar going on. Comes back, I defend the pawn now horizontally. Now I've got this situation where both of my rooks are defending both of my pawns, and I've got my rooks together on a file, so that the reason why he's had to play this is because I'm threatening to go there and trade off one of his rooks. Okay, so I check anyway, and now I've got I could have played here, right? But then after rook takes and I recapture with check, you know, his king would have to move, but if his king moves here, my rook has to move, and I'm going to lose one of my pawns, so what's the point in that? Okay, so the king comes here anyway, I simply move across, pair up my rooks again, and drop a pawn, but this is okay, because I can trade rooks, and now my rook is behind this pawn. I've also got a 1-pawn advantage on the king side as well. So now it's just a case of converting. Okay, so he does what he has to do, and pops his rook in front of the pawn. However, now it means I can come up with my pawns on the king side of the board, drop my rook away for safety, h4, h6, king comes up, no worries, he trades. I think here, that would have been maybe slightly more annoying, but even so, it's blocking off his pawn, and my king's going to be able to come round. So he trades off, and now he decides to trade rooks, okay, for the sake of a pawn, which is probably just losing, really, because he's got a pawn disadvantage on the other side of the board. So I trade off, centralise my king, and now I think here he's already in big trouble. If he advances his pawn, I simply capture and promote my f-pawn. If he exchanges, which he does, this king can't get that pawn, right? My king is ahead of my pawn. Very, very important when you're trying to get a pawn to the line. Get your king in front of the pawn, because the king then gets to lay out the red carpet for the pawn, okay? So he comes here, it doesn't matter. It's all over, right? And now, simple, straightforward king and queen endgame. You have to know how to do this. Okay, so let's just go over this quickly. The queen is a knight's move away from the king, right? That's important because the queen is covering these squares, right? Okay, so the king always has these two, okay, when the queen is a knight's move away, right? Because you have to avoid stalemate. Okay, so here, king moves here. Where does my queen go? A knight's move away from the king, okay? King goes to here. Now, very important, you want to get your queen onto this rank or file, okay? So, queen comes in, the king still has one move, okay? And now, because when the king does this, he goes from one knight's move square away from the queen to the other one, you just move your king in, right? Because you're a knight's move away, you don't need to change anything, okay? Back he goes, here comes the king. Because I always know when my queen is a knight's move away from the king can move, right? I'm not going to have stalemate. Now he comes back again. So now I drop my queen all the way up to the other side of the board. So what we want to do here now is want to use king opposition, which is when the kings, you move your king, okay, so that it is 2 squares away in a straight line from your opponent's king, okay? And when you've got that situation, we'll see how it goes. Okay, so king goes here, king comes in, right? So when we've got opposition, okay, and I move my queen here, no, not there, I move my queen here, let's say the kings are on these squares, okay? He can't go there, there, or there because of my king. And if my queen's on here, he can't go anywhere on this file, so he has to retreat to the back, or the side, or whatever. Now he does, and now, king c7, and we have opposition. That means the king cannot go to any of these squares because they're all covered by my king. Okay? So now, queen to b1, and this is what we want, right? Now the king is stuck on, in this case, the a file, right? So now, as soon as we can get king opposition, which we can force, right, we can get checkmate. King here, my king comes up. Okay? If the king moves here, queen there is mate. Okay, so he's forced to go up again. There he goes. King goes up. King goes up. And now my queen switches sides. Okay, very important. Again, if the king goes here, or any of the squares around my queen comes in straight next to the king and checkmate. So he has to go there. King up, king in the corner, there. And now whatever happens, well, he's only got one legal move anyway. And that's checkmate. Okay, so there you go. Jack-o'-lantern. Not a 1600 game as I would recognise it, I have to say. I think he made a couple of errors, and he did give away those 2 crucial pawns towards the end. Yes, I played an opening that I know, the French, which maybe helped, but yeah, glad to get the victory in the end. I think a few people have said, you know, it took them a few goes to get this particular scalp. But if you want to have a go yourself, you're going to have to move pretty quickly, because I have heard they're getting taken down after Halloween. So good luck. Fair play to you. Hope this has been useful in some way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.